At all times, tracks, trail and highways served humanity as keys to evolution. Empires and civilizations disappeared, centuries-old dust swept capitals and cities, but roads kept on breathing life back into them. Do we really understand how roads revitalized areas hundreds of years ago and how they affect people's destinies today? We go on the Treasures of the Nation expedition to reveal facts about life at the crossroads of antiquity. Modern motorways are very much new, but if a trail is left, it will surely be found even thousands of years later. Watch in this episode. How many horses could a good bow cost in the steppe? Where was the residence of the Golden Man located? And what secrets does a yellow Chinese porcelain found in Ortra hide? We live in the material world. Prices for real estate, food and household items are enough to get an impression of living standards in this or that part of the world. But what about our ancestors who lived in the distant past? How much did things that they possessed cost? To learn about this, we go on the expedition along the tracks of material values. More specifically, one of the famous and wealthiest roads of antiquity, the Great Silk Way. The first thing coming to mind when you think about nomad possessions is the yurt, a cozy felt shelter, a unique mobile dwelling, one of the key inventions of the nomads of the Great Steppe. How much did a nomad have to pay to acquire this basic tangible asset? His own movable living space. To get the answer to this question, the Treasures of the Nation expedition team arrived in Almaty to meet the enthusiasts of yurt making, Master Malik Guzmanov, his son Adilbek, and Nazira Shakaeva, a yurt expert. Malik Aga, could you tell us how much did a yurt cost back in the days? The simplest ones costed around 20 to 30 sheep or 3 to 4 cows, or a couple of good horses. During the horde time, the price for yurts for khans or say sultans could be quite high, because it could take up to 2 to 3 years to make them, and they would have inlaid work of bone or say silver. Expensive yurts were manufactured by groups of masters. One unit would do only 2 ski eases, another one only sumacs. It could take up to 1 month to produce just the sumac, with 5 to 6 people working on it. We can say that in those times, the price of a large Khan-style yurt could be compared to the price of a Bentley today. Counting in contemporary money, it could sell for up to 500,000 or even $1 million. Sometimes the steppe craftsmen created true masterpieces. The decoration of a yurt demonstrated the last artistic and cultural achievements of the Great Steppe: wood carving, bone, silver and gold incrustations, weaving, felt work, etc. What were the specific tasks or works that they did? What were their labor costs, so to say? First of all, they had to find proper and suitable timber. They would make shanirak out of birch, generally because of its strength and flexibility. Additional elements, like the uakta and kerege saganak. These sticks here used to make kerege were made of black willow. They spent a lot of time processing and treating the wood, shaping it. It took at least 1 year to manufacture one yurt. The tree that was later used to build its framework was usually taken down in the spring. In the fall, when the raw elements had dried out, the masters would soak them in special solutions and would start working on separate parts. Different specialists worked on different yurt components. The craftsmen would live nearby in owls or villages. Okay, tell me, how much does a yurt cost nowadays? Are ancient and modern prices comparable? Currently, the lowest price for a basic yurt kit is around 500,000 tenge. And what about the most expensive one? Well, I cannot give you the names, but my father and his friend recently finished quite an expensive yurt. It costed $150,000. Needless to say, everything was handmade and based on all traditional production methods to the extent possible. So it can be compared with a price of a supercar or any other expensive car for this matter. Something like that. So it turns out that today a yurt costs roughly the same as in the past. I'm wondering, what about jewelry and fashion items? It's better to see one time than to hear a dozen. So Shahzada Toktabayeva, an expert on Kazakh jewelry, invited us to Abulkan Kasteyev State Arts Museum. The Kazakhs loved horses and thought that they, horses, were also worthy of proper decoration, artfully fitting, so to say. No doubt, it wasn't cheap. For example, one set of horse garments could cost a camel or the same horse. Nonetheless, special attention was paid to personal decorations. Jewelry and other adornments were believed to possess magic properties like charms. That was the reason for the Kazakhs to transfer them from generation to generation. Such objects kept the memory of national craftsmen, their philosophy and vision of the world, hence their high value and price. Have a look at these men's belts. Each of them could cost up to 8 sheep. 8 sheep, I see. Right, and this is just for one belt with silver elements or silver plating. Or this ukaya for this matter, traditional for northern Kazakhstan. It's beautiful, isn't it? So it could cost a yearling. What is it? A young stallion, or say 10 sheep. Well, this ring here, if I lived in those times, I could easily offer a horse for it, without any back thought. The steppe smiths never negotiated the price of their products with clients in advance. It was considered good manners to leave it to customers' discretion. In turn, the buyers were afraid to offend the craftsmen with too small a payment that was equivalent to a small sin. Seeing high-quality work, buyers made their best to pay for it sufficiently. Avaricious people lived back then too, but the majority were afraid of offending a craftsman because it was an integral element of ethnic mentality and etiquette. Offending a master, especially a jewelry maker or a blacksmith, was thought to bring bad luck to the family. And nobody wanted to have bad reputation, right? Of course. So we learned how much various things costed in the past, but how did the prices form? Krim Altenbekov, a restoration artist, will shed light on why the same metal goods were so expensive and how corresponding production technologies developed. The matter is that the main price factor was the time necessary to make a particular item. In case of metal goods, one had to first find the ore, then process it to get metal, and you can imagine how labor and knowledge intensive it was and still is. Having extracted ore in underground mines, ancient metallurgists melted it in furnaces and received metal based on a special technology. Then they used clay, heat-resistant sand, wax or other materials to make casting molds. The latter were then used for die casting. How much time it could take to make something like this? It could take months and months. So we are talking about tremendous time and labor costs. After casting, the objects had to undergo refinement and working. That's why their prime cost was so high. Do you have any physical examples? But of course. For example, these decorations that were found not so long ago. Look how thin the soldering is, and the mesh and the filigree. In addition to foundry, they were skillful in various other technologies. They could process metal many different ways. Krimaga, could you say that golden jewelry was more expensive than weapons? I wouldn't say so. Military items were probably more expensive, especially these made of steel. Gold was considered beautiful, but still an adornment and used for ring-laying, for example. Indeed, any treasure needs protection. In some cases, weapons were an essential tool for getting them, which the nomads, being born fighters, did regularly. For this matter, how much one had to pay for one of the most practical types of weapons in steppe conditions, the bow. Let's listen to what a subject matter expert has to say in this regard. The Yerkosai epic has the following line: Alti atka algan adena, on Atka Algan Bukaja, which means for 6 horses they got the nomad tent, and for 10 horses the Bukhara bow. It took from 6 months to several years to manufacture a good steppe cavalry bow that was indeed a high-tech piece of equipment consisting of multiple elements. The cutting-edge military technology of the time with a corresponding price. The arrows were paid for separately. How much did one arrow cost? Let's say a standard bunch of arrows costed 1 sheep. Imagine how much 100 of them costed. 100 sheep per 1 campaign per soldier. Well, 10 sheep per soldier roughly. If it was a professional army, for example, Tamerlane's army, then during the campaign it was followed by a caravan fully loaded with thousands or even millions of arrows. The corresponding costs were phenomenal. So it turns out the whole bow and arrow producing industry existed back in the days. Why was it so developed? What was the basis for its progression? Any Eurasian nomadic civilization was before all the civilization of mounted archers. Speaking of the territory of the present-day Kazakhstan specifically, starting with the Old Stone Age, the Andronians, the Saka, the Huns, early and medieval Turkic states, the Kipchaks, the Mongols, the Kazakhs and the Jungars were all nomads. The mounted archer was always the cornerstone of their military machine. Thus the bow was the #1 weapon for the soldier. Yurts, jewelry and weapons. In the steppe all these could be exchanged for cattle. But how was the foreign trade carried out? What did our ancestors use as payment in the open vasts of the Great Silk Way? Dmitry Voyakin has been long investigating the archaeological monuments of Semirechye and southern Kazakhstan. Let's get his comments on this. When it comes to this particular region and different sites within its limits, we should always keep the Great Silk Way in mind. Silk served as the measure stick for virtually everything. Did you find any silk while excavating here? Yes, we did. We found it on the site we call Karatuma, not far from Almaty. It's a huge necropolis, dating back to the time of the Golden Man. We can call them the late Saka. So in one of the graves we were able to locate several interesting silk fragments. The fabric survived to our time. The age of that silk, 4th to 3rd centuries BC, points to long-standing trade relations with China. What about the linkages between the nomads and Europe, with the West? In my hands here I have a truly unique and surprising find. It's a bead necklace. You see its brown color. Do you recognize the material? It's amber. Ancient amber, which in our opinion dates back to 5th, 4th century BC. Did it originate from the Baltics? Most likely. But an even more tremendous fact is that it came here in raw condition. That is, not in the form of a finished adornment, but raw material. Yes, and then local stone and bone cutters processed it and used it for making Saka-style decorations. The modern science is trying to unravel the following puzzle. If in the Saka time in this steppe there were already trade centers absorbing both eastern and western goods, were the Saka completely nomadic or some of them already led a settled life? So the reality is such that it is very difficult for scientists to track the Great Silk Way exactly, because there were no roads clearly marked with bricks on the sides, or stone or asphalt, say, as we know them today, leading from point A to point B. But certain settlements and cities existed already during the Saka era or the Osun Empire. Cities of the nomads. Sounds paradoxical, and we are simply obliged to learn what those cities of the Great Steppe looked like and what expensive items they found on their premises. Cities are exactly the places usually attracting large quantities of material values and assets. So let's get on the good old Great Silk Way and try our luck. We'll start with the ancient settlement of Rakat, located within the limits of Issyk State Historical and Cultural Museum Reserve. Gulmira Railovna, tell me, are Issyk and the Golden Man really connected with the ancient trade routes, the Great Silk Way? Yes, the scientists identified four its directions crossing the territory of Kazakhstan. So Issyk, Boralday and Beshatir date back to the early period of its formation and establishment. Therefore, we can say that it went through these settlements for sure. In 1970, a sensational discovery took place. Bekmukanbet Nurmukanbetov found the so-called Golden Man. The scientist founded the museum located on the territory of Issyk Barrows. He also discovered the ancient settlement of Rakat, which is now considered the residence of the Golden Man and, as it turns out, one of the major trade hubs on the Great Silk Way. This year, we launched the prospecting survey on the territory of Rakat settlement together with our Chinese colleagues. In his day, Bekanaga used to say that the place was the Saka Ak Orda. We are in the ancient settlement of Rakat. In the past, the huge area of 83 hectares included residential quarters, craft workshops and 3 castle complexes. Right behind me, the so-called Western Castle complex was located, surrounded with a double wall and the pentagon-shaped citadel in the center. A bedazzling place. Seeing the scale of it, it becomes clear that life raged here as late as 2,500 years ago. And all that thanks to the trade routes established by our ancestors thousands of years ago. Let's go further on the Great Silk Way along the paths laid by the ancient nomads. Taraz is awaiting us. It is always interesting to come to Taraz. The city is over 2,000 years old, the fact that was officially recognized by UNESCO. So let's not waste any time and experience the rich legacy left by our forefathers firsthand. We are currently on the territory of ancient Taraz Historical and Cultural Complex. We are in the process of creating the archaeological park of the ancient Taraz. So now we are in its very heart, where previously the Shakristan was located. It was the internal part of the ancient city. I'm sure you know that Taraz is one of the oldest cities of Kazakhstan. Translated from Turkic, Taraz means scales, which is quite symbolical as the city stood on the Great Silk Way and once was a well-developed trade center. This is evidenced by both written sources and local archaeological finds like ceramics, coins, metalware and gemstones. Could you please show us where everything was located? We are currently walking along the fortification wall. And here was the densely populated and developed residential quarter. And this is the foundation of an ancient bathhouse. These round halls here are called badrab. They served as cesspools and were elements of the city sewer system. So the city was clean. There was also a water supply system going into the city. For example, these pipes here? Yes, this piping was used to transport clean potable water for city residents. An interesting fact is that the streets of the medieval city were straight. They followed straight lines, which means they were built in accordance with some plan. Yes, it is a confirmed fact that the city was constructed based on an accurate architectural plan, at least in the time of the Karakhanid dynasty. But not buildings and construction, and even not the accurately planned architectural plan of the once prospering city were the most interesting discoveries for us in the ancient settlement of Taraz. The most surprising thing was the ancient road that archaeologists found crossing the place. We are now in the central section of the settlement that was crossed by a large roadway. How long is it? As of now, we have discovered about 200 meters of it. On both sides of the central road of the ancient Taraz, there were merchant shops selling all kinds of goods, beginning with various ceramic articles down to a wide spectrum of bead necklaces, silver and golden jewelry. Where was the road going? If we follow the line of the road continuously and out of the city's western gate, we will eventually reach Shymkent. Going in the eastern direction, it connected Taraz with other towns of Talas Valley, further to the northeast with Zhetysu, and finally it went into China. So it was indeed one of the main trade arteries of Zhetysu. So just to reiterate, following this road here, we could end up in Shymkent. So the ancient road itself is blessing us on our journey along the Great Silk Way in the footsteps of our ancestors. Exactly. The ancient Taraz road leading to Shymkent naturally brought the expedition team to another no less amazing city. We are now on the premises of Shakristan. Shakristan was the place where the middle class lived. Along its edge there was a fortification wall made of the so-called dense paksa. Very often they used the same material for other construction tasks. What was the total area of the settlement? As far as we can say, it was 200 by 200 meters, and the citadel towering above it was roughly 80 by 60 meters. Was it considered big for that time? Yes, by those standards, it was very large. So it was a pretty large-scale fortress and a large hub on the tradeway. By the way, we are currently excavating the city gates, trying to see what it all looked like back in the days. We have already found a Turgesh coin there of the early medieval period. Let's go and I will show you. With pleasure. Okay, follow me. Archaeologists relate the ancient settlement of Shymkent with the city of Nujikent, translating as the new city. Based on Arab sources, in the 7th to 9th centuries, it was already quite a large fortress. Fortunately, the scientists found not only the fortress itself, but also the evidence of active trade taking place here in antiquity. This is one of the proofs confirming the existence of the early fortress or early cultural layers. This is exactly where we had found the coin. We call this place excavation site number 1. The coin was made based on the Chinese model. Okay, so this is the Middle Ages. Were there any more ancient finds here? Well, the most ancient one, of course, is pottery. Some of it dates back to the 2nd century BC. BC? Yes, the 3rd, 2nd centuries BC. So it turns out that our city of Nujikent is of the same age as the city of Tashkent Shasha. Exactly. And it appears that the city was prospering exactly thanks to trade relations with the north, the south, the west and the east. Well, naturally, the Sogda people would come here to trade. They were also exchanging livestock for food products. It was one of the trading stations where they could conveniently do business with our Kangui guys. The enterprising dealers couldn't but move ahead, further into the steppe. Otherwise, another legendary city, the city of Otra, would not have appeared along the lines of the Great Silk Way. Speaking of Otra, it had been living and prospering for a long time. The stratigraphic survey of the ancient settlement shows that the most early cultural layers of Otra correspond to first centuries of our era. This makes it almost 2,000 years old. Yes, 2,000 years. And it existed until the middle of the 18th century. That is, it continuously operated for about 1,700 years. But the Great Silk Way was not operational at that time already. It was most active during early medieval years, with its northern branch passing through the city of Otra. Another interesting fact for you, one section of the fortification wall that was once stormed by the soldiers of Chinggis Khan survived to our days, although the Mongols had leveled the city to the ground. The city lived as long as the trade continued. In those days, the Otra oasis included hundreds of settlements and dozens of towns. There was an extensive network of channels supplying water to agricultural fields, country estates and palaces, and the whole area was smothered in lush green. Otra lived thanks to the trade on the Great Silk Way. Many researchers point to its good geographical location on the confluence of the Aris and Sirdarya rivers. The city was the hub connecting many trade lines. So why did it fall into decay? The key reason for that was the advancement of maritime trade. It was used for land trade, so when the caravan tracks lost their significance, the city lost its vigor too. So trade was the main reason for Otra's existence. When there was active trade, Otra was prospering. When the trade routes died away, so did the city. Indeed, that's how it all played out. Were there any finds of imported expensive goods? In fact, yes. Here in Otra we had such finds, for example, Chinese porcelain, Iranian kashin, Syrian glass. This glass jug, for instance. Porcelain itself was and is an expensive material, but in Otra they found some very unusual porcelain of yellow color. It is unique because for the Chinese, yellow was the imperial color. Respectively, only people of the highest class and power could possess items made of yellow porcelain. The discovery of this specific type of ware in Otra speaks to the fact that not only very rich people, but also people of high social status and standing, very much respected even in China, lived here. The legendary city of Otra that was destroyed several times revived again and again on these tradeways. Now in the third millennium it is coming back to life once again, this time as a tourist attraction, a historical and cultural heritage site, and as an open-air museum. We are continuing on our journey along the tracks of the ancient Great Silkway, which led us to its yet another treasure site. On the territory of the present-day town of Turkestan, literally 2 steps away from Hoca Ahmet Yasavi Mausoleum, the archaeologists are investigating one more large and ancient trading center. We are now on the premises of the ancient settlement of Yassi Kulturbe. Its total area is approximately 2.6 hectares. In this corner here there was the city citadel of 1 hectare. In Arab the citadel is called the Ark, in Kazakh the Horde. This is where khans and governors lived. This is the main building. Initially an outpost, a caravan servicing station was located here. Here the ancient merchants, travelers and caravan camels had an opportunity to rest after their long journeys. The outpost, built for trade purposes, gradually grew into a fully fledged city. Can we have a look inside? Of course, let me show you. The main building of the citadel is cross-shaped and looks like a flower with 4 petals. Its walls were approximately 1.5 to 2 meters thick and 4 meters high. In addition to dwelling quarters, the citadel had several worship rooms. The brick curbstones or sufas found in its premises point to Zoroastrian tradition. Buildings like this one survived to our days only in 4 places, and their height is roughly ½ meter. This is the first location in Central Asia and in the Middle East where such high and perfectly preserved walls have been found. We never saw anything like this before, never and nowhere. A truly tremendous city in which not only the internal buildings, but even the bricks remained in perfect condition. Mind you, the archaeologists believe it is 2,000 years old. Do you have any proof of that? Our most important piece of evidence is a numismatic find. In the lowermost layers of the 14th building, we found a bronze coin minted at the courts of the Kushan king Huvishka. It has his portrait and everything. The Kushan Empire was a powerful state created by the nomad tribes of Central Asia and northern India. King Huvishka, depicted on the coin, ruled the kingdom during 106-138 of our era, which basically means that the city of Yassi Kulturbe was actively functioning during that time. It was quite big back in those days. A trade center where these coins circulated. So there were trade ties even with India. Exactly. The Kushan Empire covered a huge territory and was widely known in history. This small Kushan coin made it through time along the ancient roads from far India. What was it paid for? For some steppe goods, an amazing jewelry piece, or an expensive cavalry bow, or maybe for some local ceramics? Our ancestors not only created their own material goods vital for steppe conditions, but also disseminated them around the world for the benefit of other peoples. Moreover, they promoted the advancement of other nations' values, laid new trade routes between most remote points on the global map, connecting the West and the East, the North and the South. Today, although we cannot say how much different items costed in the ancient time, the road turns out to be the main material asset that we inherited. because it's the roads which allow the creation of material values, and therefore the roads are priceless.